Good evening, everyone. This week's parsha is Parsha Shmini Tavshin Pei Beis. The beginning of the parsha is about the karbanos, the sacrifice that were brought on the day that the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was meant to be initiated into service. It was the 8th day of the initiation, of the dedication, and this was the day that the divine presence was to come and rest in the Mishkan. And there were a set of sacrifices that both Aaron, the high priest, Aaron HaKayin, had to bring, and there were a set of sacrifices the Jewish people had to bring. So Perek Tes chapter 9, Psukim Beis and Gimel, verses 2 and 3. Vayemer el Aaron, he, referring to Moshe, said to Aaron, Kach locha egel ben bakar lechatas, take for yourself a calf, lechatas, for a sin offering, va'aya le'ola, and a ram as a burnt offering, timimim, complete, unblemished, va'akreb b'nei Hashem, and bring them close before God. V'al b'nei Yisrael tedaber leimar, and to the Jewish people you should speak and say, K'chu sirizim lechatas, take a he-goat for a sin offering, v'egel and a calf, v'cheves, and a lamb, b'nei shana, within their first year, tamimim, complete, meaning unblemished, la'ola, for a burnt offering. So what comes out is that Aaron brought 2 sacrifices, the Jewish people brought 3. So the Medrash of the Taras Kohanim focuses on why is it that way? Why is it that the Jewish people brought more than Aaron brought? And the Medrash says that Hashem was saying to the Jewish people, you sinned at an earlier point and at a later point. The earlier point that you sinned was where the brothers sold Yosef out of hatred and jealousy. And to cover up what they did, they slaughtered a goat, they dipped his coat in blood, and sent it to Yaakov, saying that Yosef was devoured by a wild animal. So you sinned at an earlier point with a goat. And then later on, you sinned by the golden calf. Therefore, bring a goat to atone for the sin that was committed with the goat, and bring a calf for the sin that was committed with the calf. So the Jewish people, their extra sacrifice, the goat, which Aaron doesn't bring, that sacrifice is for the purposes of atoning, bringing further atonement for the sin of the brothers selling Yosef out of hatred and jealousy. So now the question is, number one, why are we bringing in the sin of the brothers here? What connection does it have now to what's happening with initiating the tabernacle and bringing the Shekinah divine presence into the tabernacle? What's that got to do with that episode? It's also interesting to note the fact that, Aaron brings his own calf, but he doesn't bring his own goat. He brings his own ram. Jewish people bring a sheep. But this goat that the Jewish people bring, Aaron doesn't bring it. What is happening there with Aaron when it comes to this sacrifice of the goat? So there is a sefer called Yalkut Yehuda that cites that first begins discussing the question about where is Aaron when it comes to this he-goat offering that the Jewish people bring, but he doesn't bring. So one can say that when it came to that sacrifice, the sacrifice that was brought for the sin of the brothers against Yosef, which Aaron's ancestor Levi was part of, he was included in that. He could be included in the Jewish people's sacrifice to bring atonement for that sin. But when it came, let's say, to the sacrifice of the egel of the calf, which both were for the same sin, both were for the sin of the golden calf, Aaron needed to bring his own atonement for the golden calf because Aaron's involvement was unique to the golden calf more than Jewish people. The Jewish people worship the golden calf. Aaron made the golden calf, which is a sin unto itself. There's a prohibition to make an idol. There's a prohibition to worship an idol. So Aaron can't be included in the Jewish people's calf because Aaron has his own unique involvement, his own unique sin that he has to atone for. So when it comes to the sin of the brothers selling Yosef, he can be included in the Jewish people's sacrifice that atones for that. When it comes to the calf, which is to atone for the golden calf, because of his unique sin in the golden calf, he needs to bring his own sacrifice. Okay. Then the Yaakov decides to Ksav Sofer, who also approaches why Aaron doesn't bring his own goat. And he doesn't say that it doesn't use the approach that Aaron was including the Jewish peoples, but rather his approach is that Aaron didn't need it. Because when we say that the Jewish people are now atoning for the sin of the brothers, that's because, writes Ksav Sofer, something fascinating. Ksav Sofer says that when the brothers had jealousy and hatred for Yosef, this now instilled in their descendants for all generation this trait. By doing that, by acting that way that they did then, they now instilled in all generations this very negative trait. And because of that negative trait that still exists within us, we need to bring atonement for it now. Aaron, on the other hand, says Ksav Sofer, he doesn't need that atonement. Aaron is beyond any of that. Aaron is beyond any kind of hatred. Aaron is beyond any kind of jealousy. Because as Pirkei Avos teaches us, having a talmid shel Aaron, be a student of Aaron. Oyev shalom, v'roidev shalom, oyev esabriyos, and mekarben l'Torah. Aaron, trait, Abram is the supreme lover of peace, pursuer of peace, lover of people, bringing them closer to Torah. Aaron has risen above any of this kind of petty stuff. Aaron doesn't need an atonement for jealousy and for hatred. Aaron has elevated himself above that to the point that he is described as the one who loves peace, who pursues peace, and loves people. So the reason why Aaron isn't bringing the Sir Izim, the goat, to atone for the sin of the brothers is because whatever is lingering from the brothers and the Jewish people, Aaron is beyond that. Aaron has uprooted that from himself, and therefore he doesn't need that sacrifice. So we have two approaches as to why the Jewish people are bringing this goat and Aaron's not. But we still need an explanation why all of a sudden now are we bringing up the sin of the brothers against Yosef? Why? How does it come here? So Yaakov Yehuda offers two very interesting answers. One answer he says is that the reason why we're bringing another atonement for the sin of the brothers is really to remind the Jewish people of what happened then and to make sure it doesn't happen again. Right now, there was a potential for this kind of jealousy, hatred to reawaken because Aaron now is elevated above everyone. Let's remember that the kahuna, the priesthood, was supposed to belong to the firstborn of all the Jewish people. It was taken away from them and was given to Aaron. There was a possibility for a resurgence of hatred and jealousy towards Aaron. And because of the fact he was elevated over everyone else, which is what happened when Yosef was being elevated over everyone else through his father, through his dreams, they became jealous of him. Now that Aaron is being elevated, there's a strong possibility of people becoming jealous and people hating Aaron for it. And therefore now is the time to bring an atonement for that sin, for the Jewish people to remember that there still lingers in them these traits, and they've got to atone for it. They've got to study, contemplate the severity, the negativity of these traits, look back at what happened between the brothers because of it, and work on and make sure that it doesn't come up again now that I was being elevated over the rest of them. So therefore, that's the place. The reason why we're bringing an atonement, we're bringing in the sin of the brothers again, is because of the potential for it to repeat itself now that Aaron was elevated over everyone else. And according to this, it's well understood why Aaron doesn't have to bring that sacrifice, because it's really all about him. It's about others not becoming jealous of him. There's no reason he has to bring that sacrifice. The Yalkut Yosef Yehuda then brings another explanation. And he starts the explanation by saying that the purpose of the Mishnah was twofold. Number one, or one purpose was a place for bringing sacrifices, a place where sacrifices bring forgiveness and kindness and mercy upon the Jewish people. That's what Karbanos do. Now, there is we know that when it came to the Beis HaMikdash, to the Holy Temple, and it was built in Eretz Yisrael, Eretz at that point of time had been divided up amongst the tribes. So whose section of the land of Israel was the Beis HaMikdash built upon? And the answer is in Shevet Binyamin, in the tribe of Benjamin. It was in his land, in that land, that the Beis HaMikdash primarily was built. And the Medrash gives a very interesting explanation as to why. Why was Binyamin's land chosen to be the land to build the Beis HaMikdash upon? And the answer is because Hashem says the Jewish people are going to come to the Beis HaMikdash and they want to ask me for mercy. But how can I be merciful to them when they weren't merciful to their own brother? So again, the trait of jealousy, of hatred still lingers within us. And Hashem says that if this came to a point, that if this trait came to a point that you had no mercy, that your ancestors had no mercy on your brothers, and that trait's still within you, how can I have mercy on you? Therefore, the Beis HaMikdash had to be built in the land of the tribe of Binyamin, because Binyamin wasn't involved in the selling of Yosef. Binyamin didn't have any problems with Yosef, and he wasn't involved in the selling of Yosef. And therefore, the reminder, the sin of the brothers against Yosef, which would be an impediment to Hashem having mercy on us because they didn't have mercy on him, is irrelevant to Binyamin. But we see that the mercy that we want to evoke from Hashem through the Beis HaMikdash, if the Rabbeinu Shalom is reminded, so to speak, of the sin of the brothers, then we can't get that mercy because they didn't have mercy. So hereby the Mishkan, it wasn't being built in any specific tribe's land. It was built in the desert. But again, there was the issue of, can Hashem, will the sacrifices bring mercy upon us if we don't do something again, if we don't work further on the sin of the brothers? We need to atone further on the sin of the brothers towards Yosef and realize the wrong what was done, and realize that it was wrong. They didn't have mercy on him, and that we have to make sure that we don't allow jealousy to do that to us, that we should have mercy on others because of us, so that Hashem should have mercy on us with the sacrifices. So there was a necessity to have to address the sin of the brothers, because we see by the Beis HaMikdash it was an impediment to where it can be built. And now by the Mishkan, we want to make sure that that sin that still lingers within us will not be a cause for Hashem not to have mercy on us through the sacrifices that would be brought in the Mishkan. And therefore, there was a necessity, again, to atone for the sin of the brothers. What about Aaron? Aaron, his ancestor was involved. Levi was involved. Okay, so we'll say, as the first answer we gave before, Aaron is included with the Jewish people in this. Now, when it comes, but then there was another, but when it comes to the other point, but there was another purpose, so to speak, another purpose of the Mishkan, and that was, you had the sacrifices, and it was where the Shekhinah, divine presence would rest amongst the Jewish people. The Jewish people could experience the Shekhinah in the most intense and close way through the Mishkan. If there's a sin of idol worship, that can't happen. Idol worship is compared to a woman who's been unfaithful and therefore forbidden to her husband. The Jewish people were unfaithful, and therefore, how can the Shekhinah rest amongst them? Therefore, there is a need to atone for the sin of the golden calf in order for there to be the possibility of the Shekhinah resting within us. And for that, Aaron had his own sacrifice because of his unique involvement in that sacrifice. But according to this approach, the reason why the sin of the brothers is being brought up again is because, as we find, that the Beis HaMikdash couldn't be built on any other land other than the tribes of Binyamin, because any other land would be a reminder of the sin of the brothers, and that would be an impediment for Hashem to have mercy upon us. Therefore, being that we see that when it came to the building of the Beis HaMikdash, there was this issue of the brothers' sin coming up again, by the Mishkan it's here too. The Mishkan doesn't have a problem, doesn't have the issue of where it's built, but just the fact that we are now initiating the Mishkan, starting the sacrifices, trying to bring mercy upon the Jewish people. For that, we have to again make sure we have to make sure that the sin of the brothers doesn't become an impediment to the mercy that we seek through the sacrifices of the Mishkan. Now, as the parasha goes on, there is the episode that after the fire from heaven came down and burnt burnt these sacrifices that we mentioned, it says that Aaron's two sons, Nadav and Avihu, on their own, without asking, without being told, brought the Ketores. They brought incense, which would eventually be brought in the Mishkan, but they brought it without asking. And it says they brought an Eish Zara, a strange fire. They brought this incense as Ketores when they weren't supposed to. Now, that was not appropriate to do, but it's clearly not something that carries a death penalty. Nonetheless, when Nadav and Avihu did it, they were struck down by a fire. And Moshe then addressed his brother, who just lost his two older sons. And he said to Aaron, this is what Hashem said. This is what Hashem meant when he said, Bikrovaya Kadesh, through my close ones I will be sanctified. And over the face and over all the nation I will be honored. So Rashi explains that Moshe said to Aaron that when Hashem said that through the Mishkan I will be sanctified through those who are close to me, meant that Moshe knew that the sanctity of the Mishkan, which of course represents the sanctity of Moshe, would be established and would be reinforced by the fact that there would be great people who would in some way not act in an appropriate manner in the Mishkan, and because of that die. Now, it meant that these special people, now again, Hashem is not forcing these people to do that, but it was a prophecy. Moshe knew it was going to happen. Didn't know exactly fully how it was going to happen, but he knew it was going to happen. And he knew that by something that may not necessarily be a severe enough sin on its own to carry a punishment of death, if it was done by great people who carry a very heavy responsibility for everything that they do, and it would happen in the context of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, or in a inappropriate way of acting in the Mishkan, that this would sanctify God's name. This would show how sacred and how holy the Mishkan is. And Hashem has said, Bikrovai Akadesh, amongst those who are close to me, I'll be sanctified. So Moshe said that I understood that to mean that the greatest people of the nation are going to be the ones that are going to bring that out. They're going to be the ones that their death is going to, again, show the sanctity of the Mishkan. But Moshe said, but I thought it was going to be me or you. Just being honest. Knowing where they both were and their status amongst the people. But now, said Moshe to Aaron, that it was your two sons that died. They were the ones who now were they were the fulfillment of, with those who are close to me, I will be sanctified. Through those who are close to me, I'll be sanctified. That they, Nadav and Avihu, were greater than you and I. That is what Moshe said to Aaron. The fact that they were the ones that now were, they were the ones that died because of their lack of proper conduct in the Mishkan. It means they were the ones that Hashem meant to provide those who are closest to me. Through them, I will be sanctified. So Moshe is saying to Aaron, Nadav and Avihu are greater than you and I. And that's a very hard thing to understand. Moshe and Aaron were the greatest people, the greatest people of there doesn't seem to be a question. Moshe and Aaron are the greatest of the people there. They're the highest level of tzaddikim. Moshe has the highest level of prophecy. Aaron is Aaron, the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. It just comes across hard to understand what it means that Nadav and Avihu, Aaron's sons, Moshe's nephews, were greater than they. So I saw an explanation brought down from Rav Yisrael Yaakov Fisher, Zatzal. And he explained in the following way. There are two types of great people, spiritually great people. One is a person who is spiritually great because of the fact that, or let's focus on the two types of great individuals. There are those who perfect themselves, and there are those who perfect others. There's some people, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not teaching others. They don't want to teach others. It just could be that the situation is that they are focused, that they focus more on themselves than on others. While you have other great people who not only perfect themselves, but perfect others and spend a lot of time doing that. And although spending your time and energy on others will clearly hinder your spiritual growth. Now, imagine if a person doesn't have to involve himself with people. He could just focus on Torah and divine worship and contemplating God. That's all he does. He's completely involved in spiritual endeavors and spiritual endeavors that are purely spiritual, let's call them, that person has the ability to rise to very high spiritual heights. And the person who has now given up the time to help others just doesn't have that same opportunity to do those things that bring the person to those kind of spiritual heights. Now, nonetheless, a person who benefits the masses, the other people, is considered on a higher overall spiritual level than the other person. That means if we want to, let's say, look at it from a point of merit, the person who spends his time also on perfecting others, on helping others, on teaching others, although it affects his personal growth, overall he's considered greater in God's eyes. His merits are greater. The other person, though, who is completely focused just on spiritual matters, has no involvement with anything lower than, let's call it, anything less than sublime endeavors of spirituality, at the end of the day, will be on a personally higher spiritual level than the other person. That's kind of just the way it is. This person who doesn't have to deal with others doesn't have to give up from his spiritual growth. And therefore, let's call it a personal higher spiritual level, a personal higher level of sanctity, a personal higher level of clinging to God, of being totally focused on spirit, Torah and God and worship. He's on a higher level than the person who gives up from himself to teach others. Again, overall, that other person may be greater in God's eyes in a sense of merit. He's more meritorious. But when you look at the two people who is going to be on a higher personal spiritual level, it will be or could be the person who is just involved in perfecting himself or primarily involved in perfecting himself. So therefore, when Moshe says to Aaron, I thought it would be us. When Hashem said, B'krovai, amongst those who are closest to me, I will be sanctified, I thought it was us. But now I see it was your sons. Now I see what Hashem meant. B'krovai HaKadosh, I will be sanctified with those who are closest to me, meant those who in their personal level are closer to God. They have in their personal level, spiritual level, a greater connection to God in their personal level than you and I, says Moshe to Aaron. They had that because we're involved in the masses. They weren't as involved. They could be completely focused on their personal spiritual growth. And therefore, in that sense, they were greater than you and I. And therefore, they were the fulfillment. They were the ones who were chosen to fulfill B'Krevaya Kadesh. Those closest to me, I will be sanctified through them. Yes, if such highly spiritual people who have such a high spiritual personal level, if because they step out of line for some reason, they are punished in such a way that they're punished with death because they stepped out of line in the way they behave in the Mishkan, that clearly sanctifies, that shows the sanctity of the Mishkan and God's sanctity. But it didn't have to be. But at the end, Moshe and Aaron, overall, they're greater than Nadav and Avihu because they have both personal spiritual perfection and perfecting others. So overall, they're greater. But there was a way in which Nadav and Avihu were greater. Their personal spiritual connection and spiritual level and spiritual connection to God was greater than Moshe because that's what they were completely focused on without anything interrupting that. In that sense, they were greater than Moshe and Aaron. And in that sense, they could be the ones that would be the fulfillment of B'Krevaya Kadesh. I'll be sanctified by those that are closest to me. Have a wonderful evening.